It was black and white, it was on TV.
The deerstalker cap and the pipe and the elementary, my dear Watson.
A deerstalker hat and an Inverness cape.
He became sort of the quintessential lofty toff. And what we've tried to do is take him back to what we believe to be his origin, which was essentially a more visceral character.
I kept coming back to the same thing, and it was just these particular garments, and one is the black cord jacket, which what I loved about that was it had a flavour of the 1970s rock bands, and the tartan coat also I seem to have seen on some Rolling Stones album.
We're actually going back and kind of staying truer to Conan Doyle's vision of Sherlock Holmes.
We've tried to essentially make him a more streetwise character, although he's quite lofty and tofty still. He's a guy that can manage to percolate all the different echelons of English society, which were tremendously complex.
See his walking stick, a rare African snakewood hiding a blade.
It's not an old school adaptation of the book, so I don't think there's a deerstalker or a magnifying glass in sight.
In recreating Sherlock Holmes, you see that he was a martial artist, that he was even stranger than could be imagined. He had this variety of interests. Plays violin, plays piano, is just very adept at so many things.
It almost looks like a sort of Victorian Cambridge Don, you know? Old school, dishevelled, because his mind is so busy he hasn't got time to think about his appearance. To me, that makes much more sense.
London's so bleak this time of year. Not that I'm pining for New Jersey.
It's interesting in bringing a female character into a Sherlock Holmes story because Sherlock doesn't really have love interests per se, but there is one woman, and her name was Irene Adler.
She really runs the gamut of clothing. It's like, you know, these massive bustles to these, you know, lovely tailored tweed suits. You know, they're always a little bit flamboyant, yet she somehow slips under the radar.
Slightly awkward in one way because she's always in disguise and you shouldn't notice her, but that's an opportunity I couldn't quite miss, you know, was to give her really strong colour. And this woman she's totally different to the rest of London. The whole sense of that character and the incantation robes, they're a little bit heightened because they were fairly plain, sort of wizard's robe. I felt we could sort of fly a little bit.
The writers have come up with a wonderfully sort of arcane, evil counterpoint to Sherlock.
I found all sorts of ways to Blackwood that were, in essence, absolutely truthful to the Victorian period and just slightly off. So the coat's a leather coat, slightly Nazi-ish, rather odd fabric for the waistcoat, looks a bit visceral.
What I wanted to bring and what I know Guy and Robert looked to me to bring was a yin, if you like, to his yang, you know what I mean?
For this character, although it's lovely to have a terribly handsome man, he just wanted him stronger, so in fact it was the stronger tweeds that seemed to work. But in essence, it's good suits, good strong English suits that a military man, you know, and a medical man would have worn, with just a hint to Afghanistan.
In the books, he was a soldier, had fought in Afghanistan, and was essentially the brawn to Sherlock's brains.
With that military background in mind, I really wanted him to be in the middle and in fact sort of on the front line and sometimes tearing in ahead of Holmes, and therefore in allowing Robert to be the slightly more wayward, eccentric, dilettante, you know, which is Holmes.
It just feels kind of real, so I just feel so fortunate. Really making me look good. But that's the thing, is everybody is helping everybody put their best foot forward.
And now, for me, there is no other Holmes. I mean, this Basil Rathbone character is something out of illustration from Punch or what have you. It never existed. For me, this is Holmes, without it.
I thought I was a Sherlock Holmes fan and knew a bit about it. I know nothing. Compared to these people, I mean, their knowledge, their expertise is quite extraordinary. And they meet up on an annual basis to sort of celebrate Sherlock Holmes.
A lot of Sherlockians read the canon every year, or at least parts of it. They try to keep up.
Well, there's so much detail in the canon, and when we have these gatherings, people are always, somehow, there's quizzes, there's questions, and everyone's trying to outdo each other.
I would like now to put you all in reading mode and listening mode, because I'd like to tell you the story, the real story, in the words of John Watson himself, of the giant rat of Sumatra.
I think if Conan Doyle were alive today, he'd be bewildered by what we do. I don't think that authors expect to be remembered 150 years after they were born. Most authors are lucky to be remembered 50 years. Conan Doyle is still with us.
Basically, Sherlock Holmes is the ultimate superhero in the sense that he's so very self-contained, he's always right.
He is eccentric, he's odd, but he's always rational. He understands the law, but more important perhaps, he understands justice.
It appealed to the Victorians at the time and to modern audiences now.
I think one of the reasons why Holmes remains a popular character for the big screen and the small screen now too, is that every generation seems to be able to find something in that character.
Before Rathbone and Bruce came onto the scene as Holmes and Watson, Watson was always way down the cast list. He was never seen as a partner to Holmes in the way we now think of him. And it was Hollywood who saw that really there were a partnership.
Done a magnificent job at obliterating.
Christopher Morley, who founded the Baker Street Irregulars, edited a selection of the original stories, and he called it Holmes and Watson, a textbook of friendship. And that friendship is very important to the stories.
They are great reading. There's no effort getting into them. Watson is the greatest narrator, just about, in the world because he doesn't expect anything of a reader and he writes in beautiful prose. I think Conan Doyle, like most writers, wanted to have interesting characters and people that you wouldn't expect what they were going to do next. And so he was trying to find that mixture between true suspense and entertainment, which I think he kind of succeeded in better than almost anybody else.
I'd always been a big fan of Sherlock Holmes since I was a kid, and I'd always believed that there was something in there that hadn't yet been done. So when I eventually became a producer and started my own company, the first thing I decided to tackle was Sherlock Holmes. The images I saw in my head were, as I read these books, were completely different from anything I'd seen in any of the previous movies.
The more you look into Conan Doyle's book, such a rich character, such a rich world, and he and Watson and even their nemesis are just, they're such fleshed out folk.
I didn't see him as the kind of buttoned up, I would say Edwardian gentleman. Sherlock is a much more sort of modern and bohemian and complex and interesting character. You know, Conan Doyle based Sherlock Holmes on a Scottish doctor who was supposed to be able to basically look at you and tell you what was wrong with you. So in a way, Sherlock is a man who thinks so quickly that he's able to look at you and size you up.
You're engaged. The ring has gone, but the lighter skin where it once sat suggests you spent some time abroad, wearing it proudly.
What's very clear about Holmes, even in the Conan Doyle, is his humanity and his vulnerability as a person and all the issues that come with being a genius and how uncomfortable he is in the world.
He's a bit of a weirdo, and the things that get him off are the things that frustrate most people. And the things that annoy him to no foreseeable end are the things that most people would say, well, that's commonplace, that's just the way life is.
Holmes is the kind of character who, he literally does spend, between cases when he's bored, he spends 2 weeks just lying there on the sofa. And he doesn't feel bad about it. He's got that kind of slacker mentality, as well as being very, very driven when he's on a case, which I thought was really interesting. And I hope that Watson holds his own pretty well in this movie. And I think, in a way, he's the person we'd want to be in many ways.
There was so much uncovered and so much unexplored in the character. His sort of strict military training and background, and the fact that he dives headfirst into these very physical, combative, and dangerous scenarios with his partner in fighting crime, very willingly.
You know, he's definitely a ladies' man in the books. He is the writer of the stories, and so just by virtue of that, you can see his level of intellect. So I think our conception of Watson is actually a much more accurate one, and I'm rather proud of that, than what we've seen before. How it started was that I've been fascinated by another side of the Victorian life, which is the occult. And of course, Conan Doyle was as well. He was a spiritualist. He got involved in all sorts of seances and stuff like that. So I came up with a story which involved the whole notion of sort of spiritualism and the occult and all that kind of stuff. In a way, in the same way as How to with Baskervilles create a mystery where all this magic is presented, and part of what Holmes has to figure out is it real magic or not? And if it's not, how did he do it?
You know, his power is his brain. You know, his power is that he's able to figure things out that nobody else can see. There's a line in the movies, how did you see that? He says, I was looking for it. I mean, it's that kind of ability that Holmes sees things that nobody else sees.
Sherlock Holmes' insight into the human condition is quite extraordinary, and I'm sure that's, I've been trying to figure out what it is about him that makes him so popular and why we all love him, and I think it's that, ultimately. He really understands what makes people tick, I think, in the most modern way, and in a way that applies to us as, today, as much as it did. The idea of having Holmes be, of course, as smart as he is and as clever as he is, but still also be an action hero felt perfect. Most of it happens off-screen in the stories, but it definitely happens.
He's a single-stick fighter, a master of the strange art of Aritsu, bare-knuckle boxer, all that stuff.
It feels like a 1891 version of a Bond film. Sherlock actually knew martial arts. He was a fighter. He could do what he had to do. And Downey plays all those elements.
Sherlock Holmes is the first martial artist, really in Western culture. He studied something called Baritsu,
which actually is a form of jiu-jitsu, did exist, and so I thought, wow, this is fantastic. We can use all this.
Can you go for the old trianglage?
Yeah.
You'll have a hard time doing a trianglage on that.
Yeah.
Jiu-jitsu is Guy Ritchie's chosen martial art. Mine is Wing Chun Kung Fu.
Well, Robert's been training in Wing Chun for the last 5 years, and he's good. He's very fast, very flexible.
Initially, I thought I'd come in and just show Guy how badass Sifu and I were and how much we were going to contribute to the choreography, which we did. But on the very first day, he had me tie some guy up like a pretzel and choke him out with his own jacket, and we all just kind of stood there watching while he demonstrated how he would eviscerate his foe.
We've tried to integrate Sherlock Holmes into a sort of street level. We've tried to essentially make him a more streetwise character.
Well, Baritsu is a bastardization of Bartitsu, which was the English guy Barton who went to Japan and studied jiu-jitsu. But because Doyle doesn't call it Bartitsu, which locked us into Barton's jiu-jitsu, it actually is this kind of, nebulous thing that we were able to create. So it's a combination of Guy's style and my style.
When it comes to Holmes' fighting skill, that's where his gentlemanness comes out. We don't want to oppose force on force, but rather flow around it or through it and utilize their energy against them. But ultimately, as much as possible, we want to keep that energy flowing forward, 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 forward. And when you hit an obstacle or a wall, then you flow around and keep coming. The idea behind the punch bowl sequence was that it's like his lab. It's where he goes to experiment and trial and error and make mistakes.
So we're using sort of pressure points, how he's getting in to block the punches from the other guy.
So you have to be able to see the larger picture, make sure that punch or that strike doesn't land its mark, and in turn, simultaneously go after the opening that has been exposed by the attack itself.
And basically we've been doing, as sort of safely as we can, full contact fighting. So there's some great shots there.
Every hit you see him take is absolutely real, and the action they accomplished on that I thought was really quite extraordinary.
He's very physical, and in fact outdoes a lot of the stuntmen with his physicality. You could not think of a more perfect Holmes.
Don't cut. Here we go, camera mark. We're running. Good guys, keep the physicality. And action!
In recreating Sherlock Holmes, you see that he was even stranger than could be imagined.
There's loads to be interpreted from the originals, and loads that we've locked in our minds that's wrong.
What we've tried to do is take him back to his origin as essentially a more visceral character, more of an adventurer.
This is not your grandfather, Sherlock Holmes.
The whole thing is just being reinvented as something much more dynamic.
There's the refined quality to it, and at the same time it's very rough and tumble. It's got that Guy Ritchie feeling to it.
It just feels new. It feels fresh. It feels like you're seeing this for the first time.
Watson, what have you done?
5, 4, and 3.
I went to boarding school when I was 6, and what they did then was if you were good, they used to play Sherlock Holmes stories. They had speakers in each room, and if you were bad, they used to switch off the stories.
Sherlock Holmes I fell in love with, as I think probably every young boy did. And I knew there was something there and a way to do it that wasn't quite what we'd seen before. The images I saw in my head as I read these books were completely different from anything I'd seen in any of the previous movies.
Your boys have done a magnificent job obliterating any potential evidence.
Yes, but at least they never missed an opportunity to miss an opportunity.
The mental image we all have of Sherlock Holmes as a short-haired, clean-shaven, stiffly starched guy with a deerstalker hat and the pipe and all that kind of stuff.
What happened to Sherlock Holmes is he became this rather posh, homogenised individual, the quintessential lofty toff.
Mud of the coffin.
Well, we are in the process of bringing it up now.
At what stage of the process? Contemplative.
He knew everything, and he always figured it out, and he was a bit snooty about it, but no one seemed to give him too much guff because they needed the information he had. He was one of those guys.
And action!
But the truth is, the more you look into Conan Doyle's books, you know, it's such a rich character, such a rich world.
Rolling.
The books, some of them were very much small deductive pieces, and some of them were big adventures.
By going back to the original stories, you see that it isn't a dusty old chestnut. It is fresh.
We want to show it in a way that we've never seen before, and in fact we're being truer to the source material than maybe some of the previous films were able to be. Because we have the technology to build a scope much bigger than any of the previous versions were able to.
You want to get bang, swabang, yeah, swabang. Using his element. You want to get a staccato, regimented smash, yeah, he's in his element.
I always used to describe it as the Guy Ritchie version of a Sherlock Holmes movie because his style of cinema is so fresh and modern and sort of kinetic and fun.
You do know what you're drinking is meant for eye surgery.
Guy's a perfect director for this reimagination of Sherlock Holmes because he's an innovator and he's kind of reinventing himself as well. Early on in his career, I think he really changed filmmaking and inspired a lot of directors since.
If you put his natural sort of intelligence into the period setting, it works wonderfully well.
What are the wars?
Oh, she's covered.
Enough, please. Enough.
Guy knows exactly how to combine action, the adventure, the scope, the sense of humor, and get great performances out of these actors.
Them asking Guy to do it was a stroke of genius.
Good.
The more it's like that.
He's brilliant at physicalizing drama.
3, 2, 1, bang!
You know, it is very, very action-packed, and he's so incredibly good at that. He always says, I need you to really huff and puff through this one, you know? He always says, huff and puff, I need some huff and puff.
And then you're off. And then the camera goes too.
Okay, stand by to go again.
If you release the handbrake and let the whole thing just free fall and have the balls to go with it, you know, great things happen. And Guy's been brave enough and generous enough to let us do that.
I told you you'd be coming out the top window, soldier boy. There isn't any way you'd be coming over that terrace.
Well, technically that isn't the top window, is it, sailor boy?
Anyway, anywho.
Boom. I don't know, you got to watch out for the old stuntman struggle. Okay. There was a bit of danger of that going on.
Guy's a real man. He's a martial artist. I'm a martial artist. We meet on that level. We meet as lovers of film and lovers of kind of almost thumbing our noses at what the status quo is and saying we can do something as cool as that. In fact, we think for us, for our take on it, our likings, we can beat it.
Tráilers. Visita mi
Juliet,
canal.
take 4.
No, harder, go. Come on, dude. Punch me in the stomach. Punch me in the stomach. Go.
When this project first came to me, I thought we should go for, I know they've already done the young Sherlock Holmes, but we were thinking about doing a sort of late 20s version. But once I got to know Robert a bit, it seemed conspicuously obvious after a while, and now it's almost ridiculous to think back that it could have been any other actor.
So someone will set it.
Well, you just
From the
slide
time.
it in.
So
as you're
the
up
discovery,
there.
though? When's the discovery? The discovery, well, let me think here. After the throw-in.
He's already knocked you over there and you're there organically. Stay over there.
I mean, Robert is the perfect Sherlock Holmes, really, isn't he? He's so brilliant, so funny, and so quick-witted, and he thinks a bit like Sherlock Holmes, I think.
Holmes, what are you doing?
Nothing.
Are you wearing a
False nose? No.
Tell me, that Actually, it does have its own charm.
He can fizz at a higher level when he's improvising, and it's amazing that in the story, Holmes has that quality that he cannot help seeing clues.
There's a lot of elements there that I couldn't help but infuse him with. He's always had a sense of humor.
You know, in another life, you'd have made an excellent criminal.
Yes, and you, sir, an excellent policeman.
He's a bit of a weirdo in that he spends most of his time chasing down details that people would go out of their minds if they had to engage.
Several sets of initials scored into the lid. Excellent.
Cut there and reset.
The archetype to me is the person who understands what all you normal people are doing out there, but he's a man on a mission and he represents adventure incarnate.
Fist patella. Summary prognosis, conscious in 90 seconds, full faculty recovery. Unlikely.
Well, it's all in the books, you know. He's a single-stick fighter, a master of the strange art of Baritsu, bare-knuckle boxer, all that stuff.
He was the first martial artist, really, in Western culture.
He's an action hero.
I've got to tell you, Robert is a very exceptional human being. In Iron Man, you saw that he was physical, but I didn't realise he was as physical as he is.
You all right? Yeah. Let's do it again.
Luckily, he's been doing Wing Chun for 5 years, so he's good. He's fast. He is really fast.
As opposed to a sort of underhook.
Sherlock Holmes studied something called Baritsu, and we've tried to integrate that into a sort of street level.
He is not just portraying that in the movie, he's walking the walk. That philosophy, that discipline, is something that he shares very much in common now with the character.
He brings his full arsenal, and out comes something you've never seen before or never expected before.
One more. Now, you know, it wouldn't be bad. Let him do one. How do you say one more, please, in French? Encore, s'il vous plaît.
What's exciting about working with someone like Robert is that it becomes very much its own.
Relax. I'm a doctor.
The riskiest character in this whole story is Watson, because he's always been depicted as being a certain way.
Watson is portrayed in the movies in the Basil Rathbone films with Nigel Bruce, who's kind of a heavy guy like me, who sits around and talks about things.
A few people were surprised when I was cast as Watson, but when you go back to the original text, you realise that, in fact, this is a guy in his mid to late 30s. He has just left the army. He was a bit of a war hero.
Watson is a badass, a ladies' man, a man of action.
I'll go inside you like that. Yeah.
Well, Jude, I think, embodies exactly the idea they had for a modern Watson.
Watson has been coined Hotson on this set because all the girls think he's hot.
It's no mystery that gals like Jude, but that would be too easy, so he's almost withdrawing and playing someone who's just a little bit proper, but it's appropriate for the period.
He's very much the alkaline to Robert's acid.
Look longer at the top. It could maybe that you hit me.
The second we met, we just started bouncing ideas off each other, and we were very much on the same page, which is a pretty eccentric page.
Holmes, does your depravity know no bounds?
No.
It was clear that we wanted to create a chemistry that was both, you know, incredibly tight, but also there's that wonderful sort of humour where friends bicker.
You're not making any sense.
You're not human!
And one of the big inspirations for Guy with this has been Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, and there's that quality.
I suppose I'm interested in the partnership between men and the humour and the irony and the quirks that go with it.
What was that about saving bullets?
They captured the levity and the humour, but at the same time they captured the sincerity.
We've just managed to keep this relationship, and Robert and I have worked very, very hard on it, alive. And it's been nothing short of great fun. Dinner?
Wonderful.
Royale?
My favourite.
Y tus tráilers.
It's too good, dude. It's too good. Bring it from the top.
Still rolling. B camera.
It is kind of a bit of a love letter to Victorian London as well.
London was always a character, obviously, because, I mean, Sherlock Holmes is synonymous with London.
You have this incredibly fascinating, engaging, and dangerous city, and he knows every inch of it.
After that, the carriage forked left and right, a telltale bump of the Fleet conduit.
The locations have been amazing. You know, I'm a Londoner born and bred, and we were going to places I'd never been or never seen.
We had to be here to shoot locations, and, you know, we're running down real streets.
The feeling of doing this picture in London is incredible. I mean, it is really a location movie.
The work that we did out on the streets, you could not have done in the studio, not at that scale.
Whether it's through incredible sets or CGI or whatever it is, we can really go back to London of 1891 and recreate it.
They've built us docks, they've built us factories, they've built us boats. It's just fantastic to turn up and, you know, make a big film.
He's presenting it in the Guy Ritchie way, which is down and dirty and feels very authentic.
I hope you get there by breakfast, because the boys are getting hungry.
Guy and London just go hand in hand, and I think it's exciting for him to be able to go back and say, well, what would it have looked like then?
Partage!
3, 2, 1.
I was attracted to the project because we could reinvent an iconic English figure.
What Guy brings is something that just weeds out all of that old-fashioned cliche from it.
What excites me is that I feel that we have made a movie that's very specific to itself.
I think we've been faithful, but I do think we've also injected it with life.
Previous productions of Sherlock Holmes have obviously been shackled by one thing or another, but we really are going for it.
Pleasure.
I have a fantastic creative team, so I have Sarah Greenwood, who's in charge of production design, who's done an amazing job.
It's such a fantastic story, and it's so kind of brilliantly English. You know, the combination of Guy Ritchie and Sherlock Holmes, you know, I just thought, well, fantastic, that'll be a completely different approach. You know, his thing is he doesn't come in pretending that he knows everything about period, and so he listens and he wants it to be authentic.
She was very determined to try and get scale to the movie. It's quite a big challenge because we had quite a short period to prepare the movie.
My first impression when I read the script was, you know, it's like, this cannot be real. You know, we had 11 weeks prep. It was a real challenge to achieve what we've achieved in the time that we had.
What we've done is we've gone back to what are undoubtedly fantastic stories in a fascinating period, Victorian London, which was seedy and menacing and dark and full of theatre and drama. And we've looked at the qualities of these stories that perhaps haven't yet been investigated.
Okay, we'll go one more time, everybody. Excellent, thank you.
I see two men, brothers. Not in blood, but in bond.
Period should not be all, but period is what gives it its context and its rationale. And so as far as the interior of Baker Street, even though it would have started life as a relatively conventional kind of lower middle class house, it was decorated maybe 20 years, 30 years ago. It's gone slightly tatty, you know, and then Holmes has come in and basically he's screwed with it. He's completely messed it up. It is not a conventional Victorian parlour at all. It's the antithesis of that. You know, this is what would drive Mrs. Hudson completely mad. So here we have a beautiful William IV sideboard, which would probably, you know, be worth tens of thousands of pounds in our day, not in her day. It would have been an out-of-fashion piece of furniture, but certainly it would not, Mrs. Hudson would not be happy that Holmes is using it for his experimentation.
All this was actually heavily researched but pulled together in quite a hurry because we were running out of time. We were doing all the other sets as well. But we sort of gathered all the smalls as we went along from like flea markets, antique shops and hire companies, so it's a real sort of mass mix really.
A lot of the film was shot outside of London to try and get sort of Victorian cameos, which we could then patch together to create our Victorian London.
And it was great having the freedom to go to places like Manchester and Liverpool, but to shoot the old dockside in Liverpool was fantastic, you know, because it's there and it's kind of, it's on its last knocker, you know, it's literally penciled for conversion in the next, 12 months or so, so it was really great to be able to use those, you know, incredible buildings and things.
Every other day, we're in a completely new location, and they've built us docks, they've built us factories, they've built us boats. You turn up and something's happened.
The work that we did at Chatham on the shipyard, you could not have done in the studio, not at that scale. It's just a sheer scale we were able to achieve outside.
But I think the main contrasts in the film are within the exteriors and the interiors. So the interiors, you know, have a jewel-like quality, and then, you know, the monochromaticness, which is to a certain extent what London was like. He will use whatever you give him, which is great, you know, it's fantastic. And also see things in a slightly different way.
We are in Somerset House, which used to be some old Tudor palace in the middle of London. In fact, up and down here, you've got all the old tombstones that line the walls. So we're more or less in the basement of Somerset House. And here, this is replicating Blackwood's cell. And it works perfectly for the prison sequence. And also, because there's this enormous pathway that goes all the way around. So we can use it for the chase sequence at the beginning for the second unit. So it kills a couple of birds with one stone.
You really feel London, and you feel the characters, and you feel the life at that time. And it was a elegant time, and a seedy time, and it was a weird time.
I love the contrast, I really do. I think, you know, from the grimness of this and the, you know, and Reardon's and everything to the grandness of, you know, the Grand Hotel or the Royal.
So it kept you on your toe, it really did. And otherwise, so you don't get bored, you keep fresh, and you accumulate knowledge at such a rapid pace because you have to.
It does tick all the boxes. It does say this is Sherlock Holmes in this right period, but it also says that this is something, you know, very funny, fast-paced, fast-moving, and powerful. There's something very powerful about it, and that's what I've not seen in a film of this period.
I love being an American playing Sherlock Holmes in England. As long as the accent's all right, it's all gravy.
Take us under the bridge. Port side, approximately 100 yards. Beyond that, you'll find the mouth of a tunnel which leads us to the shores. Ladies first.
Robert Downey is the perfect Holmes in my eyes because he's American for a start. I like the fact he's American, which sort of gives him an international feeling. But his English accent is actually perfect.
I was lucky enough to do Chaplin with him and Restoration. And so we set the groundwork, really, I suppose, not knowing that this would ever happen.
I'm just different now, so I love language so much. And I love words. Before, though, I thought I'm doing this accent, and then I just do my voice, which is, you know, the best voice that I'm aware of for me.
Lady Ramsay reports an emerald bracelet.
Insurance swindle. Lord Ramsay likes fast women and slow ponies.
Can't. The lovely thing about Robert is that he can do it off the cuff, virtually. I mean, that, and then I have to go in and say, well, you know, just do that, and it's done. It's often to do with rhythm.
It's RP, received pronunciation. He who would hear and now know aught of the new art must fight, toil, care, learn, then take his ease. Phonetic alphabet type stuff.
I don't know how many times I can say, crime scene photographer is what your constabulary requires.
A photographer?
Indeed. It is the future.
That kind of gives Holmes and Robert's accent total authenticity.
And often as an actor, you find that doing an accent can get in the way because everything you're thinking about is concerned with the sound of your accent. But he doesn't seem to have any problems with that whatsoever.
We allow some changes to take place, but it's good to know where it ought to be, and then you can break those rules. And use modern terminology or modern phrasing for effect.
I need your help. I want you to find someone. Why?
Careful.
Why are you so suspicious?
Well, shall I answer chronologically or alphabetically?
And Andrew Jack has gotten me to the point where it's like, well, technique is just the price of admission. And then it's what do you do with those? So I lean on him quite heavily when he'll tell me why a rising or lowering inflection changes entirely. And he is the expert, and I am the student.
Ah, Joe Regan. I was the 15th most dangerous man in London.
On fifth, sir.
Working your way up. What are you in for this time?
Piracy, is it?
Piracy on the Thames. Piracy on the Thames. How romantic.
It's often just stressing, like, I'd say, pick up the book. And he'd say, pick up the book. So he'll put the stress on up instead of pick, like Americans do. Come in, and we go, come in.
That said, he'd noticed I've come a long way in my confidence, and he also said my voice is just much less grating to work with because now I'm in my 40s and it's dropped into my chest a little more.
My goodness me. Here we are. Well, they should be able to give us an address.
My goodness me. What a coincidence. There's one thing about the watch you forgot to mention, Holmes.
Yeah, you'll go again on that. Reset, everybody.
So, yeah, when do I sound like I'm doing an English accent at all?
Yeah. Wow. A little bit Quentin Crisp every now and then.
Mouth the side and put it together. Let's go to the top.
Yeah, let's go.
Sherlock Holmes, he's not that interested in women, at least on the surface. He's certainly not interested in marriage, and he's not interested in the typical kind of domestic relationship that Watson would want to have.
He's a weirdo. He's not asexual. It just seems like he says to Watson, the fair sex is your department.
I mean, he even says in one of the stories that he doesn't believe in love and that kind of emotion because it would interfere with his process.
I think he's too aware of the fact that it's an investment, and that he has sacrificed his potential enjoyment in said realm for a higher cause.
Part of Lionel's original conceit was to bring Irene Adler into the story, and Irene is an interesting character because she actually didn't appear in a lot of the stories. I think maybe only one story, actually, Scandal in Bohemia, but she had a lasting impression on Holmes, and she was always called the woman.
And it seemed logical to bring Irene back. They met once in Scandal in Bohemia. I would suggest that maybe they met again. She broke his heart, and now they meet again.
And it's a totally unorthodox romance. Even though it's a period in its style, that I think the romance is quite, modern at times.
Is that the Maharaja's missing diamond? Or just another souvenir?
He's a cruel despot with a palace full of them. Let's not dwell on the past, shall we?
So it's kind of a fun dynamic because you have a woman who's the only one who bested Holmes. And there's something about her that just drives him crazy, both in the good and the bad way. So it's kind of the perfect character to introduce to the mix. And one of the things that a lot of people don't realize is that Irene was actually an American. She was born in New Jersey.
In the original book, I think she's an opera singer, and she's also sort of an adventuress. She's a woman who has various affairs with men. And I sort of went a step beyond, and I imagined her as a sort of secret agent. They're both after the same thing, and they can't decide whether to fight each other or to make love.
The movie itself seemed like it was going to be a lot of fun, and there's, obviously lots of action. I love, characters that are really physical, so Irene had that going for her. Robert is like a superhero in disguise, and he's so collaborative and so funny and so incredibly creative, really keeps you on your toes.
And Rachel is incredible because she's so beautiful and she's so sweet, but, and this is what we're doing with Irene, and you push her, you're gonna see a real vicious side.
I've had to find some sort of balance between, the elegance that women had at that time and this fearless, reckless nature. She's definitely a real renegade, she's playing in a man's world at this time.
She comes across as incredibly sweet and lovely, but underneath it all, she's just terrible.
What have we here? She literally just knifed a guy in the alley, and she just waltzes through with her roses and her beautiful dress and every hair in place, you know. Just got that snaky quality where you don't know if she'll kiss you or kill you. She's, you know, somewhere in between. And I have so many weapons. I mean, I don't know where they all fit, but apparently I can fit a knife, 2 guns, and a pair of handcuffs, all in the suit with these 2 little pockets.
We are in a position with technology today and the kind of budget that we have to really recreate London as a character, but in a way that will feel like a real place.
We wanted to make London a character. We wanted to show London in the end of the 19th century at its greatest glory and at its most depraved.
Well, it was the empire at its height. It was nasty, and the fog wasn't fog, it was smoke. And yet there's this sense of immense engagement in technologies of the near future and the sense of wonderment.
I mean, London was as vibrant as New York in the 1890s, and arguably more so as the centre of the Industrial Revolution. It was at that period where they were doing things that were obscenely ambitious.
By the nature of what this is, Guy's required to sort of step it up. The scope of this movie is much larger, both on a budget level, but just in terms of where we're shooting.
Can you put a hand there? Sure. Put your hand there for a little bit of support. You know, have a good puff. And then look at what it is that you've just ascended, and then you're off. And then the camera goes too.
Okay, stand by to go again.
What we've done so far gives us all the pointers. You know, this is the feel of it, this is the look of it. Everything being photographic as opposed to painterly.
So we wanted to show it, you know, and have it be a living, breathing thing. So we had to use visual effects because some of those elements don't exist anymore.
We have incredible locations in this movie. We want to really maximize it and then let our visual effects guys take over and bring it back in time.
We did start in places that do exist and added to it and built on it and created just a whole size and scale of the city that you've never seen before.
It's one of the joys of making film, and especially making film in today's day and age, when, you know, we have bigger budgets, we have more effects at our fingertips, and we can really go back to London of 1891 and recreate it.
The idea here, and one of the things Guy does bring to it, is you want a gritty reality to it. We still have a lot of fun with it. There's still a huge scope to it, but we want it to feel like we're really in 1891. We didn't want to feel like we were on a sound stage.
It just is a vast canvas. It's a huge looking and feeling movie. It has weight to it, and it has scale and size and panorama.